There's something peculiar happening in the digital age. We live in a world where nearly everything gets shared. Breakfast plates, gym selfies, vacation snapshots, even private struggles wrapped in vulnerability posts. Yet scattered among the billions scrolling, there exists a quieter population. They watch, they observe, they consume content constantly, but they never contribute. They remain completely invisible. The question that lingers is simple but profound. Why would someone choose silence in a space designed for noise? It's tempting to assume these people are simply shy or disengaged. But the reality runs much deeper. Beneath their silence lies an entire psychology, one that reveals something crucial about human nature, self-worth, and the quiet resistance against a culture that equates existence with exhibition. For some, silence isn't absence. It's autonomy. Social media has fundamentally altered how identity gets constructed. It rewards performance. It celebrates display. And in doing so, it has turned ordinary people into curators of their own reality shows, editing their lives into digestible highlights for an audience that's half paying attention. Those who refuse to participate aren't rejecting technology or connection. They're rejecting the terms. They're saying no to the unspoken contract that demands constant documentation, constant proof, constant validation. Research in psychology reveals something fascinating about people who rarely post. They tend to score higher in traits like self-restraint, introspection, and emotional self-sufficiency. They're less vulnerable to social comparison, less dependent on external validation. They're not performing their identity for approval. They're living it for themselves. Because most of what gets posted isn't just communication. It's identity architecture. Every caption, every carefully filtered image asks, "This is who I am. Do you approve?" The metrics become a measure of worth. Likes translate to validation. Silence translates to irrelevance. But when someone stops participating in that system, something shifts. Worth becomes detached from digital applause. Life stops being narrated in potential captions. Moments get experienced for their own sake, and that's the hidden psychology behind many people who don't post. They crave authenticity in spaces that feel increasingly artificial. For many, the decision not to post comes after a kind of burnout. Maybe they once shared everything until one day it stopped feeling real. They realized that every time they shared something beautiful, an invisible pressure emerged to outdo it next time. They weren't living, they were producing content. So they stopped. Quietly, no dramatic farewell post, just a slow fade from the feed. But here's what often gets misunderstood. Not posting doesn't mean not feeling. Often it means the opposite. It means caring so much about presence, about meaning, about protecting what feels sacred, that broadcasting it would somehow diminish it. There's a concept in psychology called psychological ownership. It describes the feeling that something belongs deeply and uniquely to you, a memory, an experience, a moment. And when that moment gets posted, the sense of ownership dilutes. It becomes shared property, open to interpretation, subject to judgment. People who don't post are often protecting that sense of ownership. They're keeping their experiences untouchable, private, pure. And perhaps that's not withdrawal. Perhaps it's a quiet form of freedom. When was the last time something meaningful happened, and there wasn't even a flicker of impulse to share it? That reflex isn't natural. It's conditioned. It's the product of years of dopamine loops, training brains to equate validation with value. When someone steps outside that system, it can feel like rebellion. But it's also healing. They rediscover the simplicity of doing things without an audience, cooking without photographing, traveling without tagging, feeling without explaining. In that space, something awakens. A kind of self-awareness that doesn't require witnesses. Not everyone who doesn't post operates from a place of peace, though. Some are driven by fear. Fear of judgment. Fear of rejection. Social media has amplified what psychologists call self-presentational pressure. The constant awareness of being watched, even when nobody's actually watching. For some, that's exhausting. So they retreat. Not because they don't want connection, but because the cost of visibility feels too high. Ironically, the quietest people online often have the loudest internal worlds. They're not absent, they're overflowing. They just choose stillness over spectacle. In a world that constantly demands, "Look at me," choosing invisibility becomes an act of self-definition. It says, "I exist beyond your perception." Not everything experienced is meant to be witnessed. Sometimes the most profound aspects of life happen quietly, privately, unposted. Being unseen is not the same as being insignificant. It's actually where identity gets formed, not performed. Here lies the paradox. Social media was designed to connect, yet it often leaves people feeling more isolated than ever. When someone stops posting, they stop chasing digital closeness and start rebuilding real connection. They notice who checks in without needing updates. That kind of connection, unbroadcasted and raw, feels heavier, warmer, infinitely more real. People who don't post tend to live in that space. They build relationships that don't require proof. They find comfort in unshared moments. Part of this is about identity security, knowing who you are even when nobody's watching. When someone is comfortable in their own company, they don't need an audience to validate their worth. That's not arrogance. That's peace. And often, the same people who never post have the most interesting stories. But they save them. For coffee, for dinner, for quiet conversations where screens aren't glowing between faces. Because real connection, to them, isn't measured in comments or reactions. It's measured in shared silence, in eye contact, in laughter that doesn't need witnesses. These are people who carry entire worlds within them, who process deeply, observe constantly, understand quietly. They don't need the world to applaud their existence. They just need to live it. And maybe, in a world desperate to be seen, their silence isn't a flaw. It's a mirror, a reminder that not everything meaningful requires an audience. The psychology here goes deeper than preference. It's rooted in how brains process validation. Every time a post receives attention, dopamine gets released, the same chemical involved in reward and addiction. Over time, brains begin craving that validation. Now imagine someone who resists that loop, someone who deliberately disconnects from the dopamine cycle. That's not disinterest, that's discipline. People who don't post often possess what psychologists call a strong internal locus of control. Their sense of worth and happiness originates from within, not from external approval. Studies show that people who take extended breaks from posting often experience measurable increases in emotional stability and life satisfaction. Because when identity stops being constantly mirrored back through screens, it solidifies. It becomes real. Maybe that's the real rebellion, staying whole in a world that rewards fragments. But silence online doesn't always mean serenity. Sometimes it conceals exhaustion. For many, social media became a place where they sought connection, but found depletion instead. There's a subtle emotional fatigue that comes from witnessing endless highlight reels while still assembling your own behind-the-scenes reality. Eventually, some people step away, not from bitterness, from self-preservation. That's a quiet truth of this generation. Visibility has been confused with value. There's an assumption that to matter, one must be noticed. But real meaning doesn't require witnesses. The most meaningful moments often happen without a single person watching. No cameras, no captions, no audience, just existence. Maybe that's what those who don't post understand best. Privacy isn't loneliness. It's intimacy with yourself. When broadcasting stops, internal voices return. The parts that got lost in noise reconnect. That's profoundly spiritual in today's world. Not withdrawal. Homecoming. When psychologists discuss authentic self-expression, they emphasize congruence, the alignment between internal self and external presentation. But in the age of filters, that alignment constantly distorts. So when someone chooses not to post, it might be their way of staying congruent, of preserving that fragile truth between inner and outer worlds. Those who live quietly often feel life most intensely. They're not distracted by performing it. They absorb details others miss, how light changes on walls, the pause before someone speaks, distant laughter. They're present. And presence has become the rarest currency in a world built on attention. Sometimes that presence makes them misunderstood. They get labeled detached, mysterious, even cold. Yet look closer and their silence isn't emptiness. It's depth. It's calm that comes from no longer needing to explain yourself to be understood. That's what people who don't post understand best. Not every truth is meant for crowds. Some parts deserve to remain untouched by algorithms and opinions. Because once something becomes public, it stops being purely yours. And some moments are too sacred for that. So when someone never posts, don't assume they're hiding. Maybe they're just living. Maybe they found peace in quiet corners of existence. Maybe they remembered what the rest forgot. That being unseen doesn't mean being alone. That being quiet doesn't mean being empty. That sometimes the truest expression of self is silence. Because in the end, humans aren't meant to be performances. They're meant to be people. And those who don't post remind everyone of exactly that. Every quiet, unfiltered, beautifully invisible day